With Cape Media News Conversations, I'm Sarah Colvin. The United States has had a lot of tragedy to deal with in recent months, including massive storms in Texas, a storm in Puerto Rico, and most recently, what many news outlets are calling the worst mass shooting in United States history. Of course, what happened just this week in Las Vegas, Nevada, where a man opened fire on a group, killing more than 59 people, injuring hundreds of others. Certainly a difficult thing for many of us to process. I think a lot of us are feeling stress and a little discomfort. So here with me today to talk about how best we can process these emotions that we're feeling in light of all the tragedy, I welcome Dr. Ken Texeira of Quincy College, professor of psychology, a good friend of mine, here to the studio. Dr. Tex, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks so much for having me. This is great. I'm so happy to be back to talk about everything that's going on in the world today.
Absolutely. And so I really feel like, with all of this news that we have to process, and it's not just all the tragic events, I think it's just a general feeling of unrest in our community or in our nation. It seems like every other weekend there's something else going on, some group attacking another group, just a lot of hatred. And I think it's starting to wear on us a little bit. So is there, from a psychological perspective, what are we experiencing?
Well, I think fatigue, for one, because we've had tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, and what happens in these things is you almost get a compassion fatigue, where you're like, I just have no more resources to help or care for anybody, and it usually ends up feeling like a little numb. So I think everyone feels a little numb, a little detached. One thing to be really careful about, because any of these natural tragedies can reignite parts of our story that might have been damaged in the past, and this term gets teased a lot, but it's a real psychological term, is triggered, right? Someone could trigger a post-traumatic event and then have it triggered, so it would kind of come back. So I think a lot about my friends that have gone off to war and come back, that have post-traumatic stress disorder with shootings, or anyone that suffered in any kind of natural disaster, because we've really literally had every sort of plague or trauma that you could have within the past couple months.
We really have. And so again, that's taking a toll on us. So for those of us who may suffer from PTSD or those who don't, what's your advice? Like, how can we best process these things? How can we best kind of feel better or help others that might be having a difficult time?
One thing to think about is the millpond of stress. So if you would throw a rock in a pond, the people that are closest to the epicenter of that are probably going to need the most help. This could be someone that's a first responder, someone that was in an event, like whether it be a shooting or a natural disaster. So those folks are going to have the most acute level of difficulty, and then that's going to ripple outwards. So being aware of where you're at in that story and how it might affect you, kind of filling that boat and refilling the stress that happens within some of these stressors can really just kind of break down our coping. So what I'd suggest for people is, some of the basic stuff from the biological needs is sleeping more, getting good rest, trying to find good healthy coping, because it's so easy to unhealthily cope for some of these things, like, drinking or drug use. And we see a lot of that actually, in wakes of trauma like this, because people just are overwhelmed.
Absolutely, and I think for those who do have that option, and those in the recovery community, certainly I think this is a difficult time for people who may be saying, wow, all of this bad things are going on, I might need to turn back to substance abuse. And I think that could be a risk for some people who are dealing with recovery.
Sure, and so this is something that, we talked about before. This is another thing that can definitely kind of come back into people's stories. Other things too to think about, just from the biological sense, but there's also the social sense. So there's certain people that are really good for you, and those people are the ones that you want to kind of reach out for and try to connect with. So maybe it's a loved one or a spouse or a parent, and even our kids, being able to reach out socially, because there's a lot of strength to be found from different places. So there's the biological, trying to be healthy, get good rest, exercise, the social, finding good social connections, getting therapy if you need it, and early and often. I think everyone could benefit from talking in a kind of non-judgmental place and hammering out some of these feelings. So there's the biological, the psychological, the social we talked about, but the psychological too. One thing that I would love to stress and talk a little bit about today is just building resilience, especially in our children and our neighbors and our community, being really patient with each other. So I think one thing, and this happened today when I was helping to promote this show, we got into a talk about gun debate and whether or not weapons should be legal or not. And You know, for the most part, I think people really want to understand other people's perspectives, and it's challenging when one group might think it's a super big problem and another group kind of dismisses it. And we could see that from like the top levels of government all the way down. And even with our friends. So getting people that are allies in our social world too.
Right. So how do we build up resilience? I think that's, especially as we're thinking about kids who are growing up in this kind of environment, they might be desensitized to all of these things. So how do we make ourselves stronger and better equipped to deal with tragedies that we've been experiencing?
Sure, and building resilience in children moving forward is an awesome way. One thing is to help kids with relief efforts in small ways. They don't have to, rent a U-Haul truck and go in the middle of the trauma, but small things that they can do to help other kids or other people going through this, building that kind of empathy, because I think this is an exercise in our society that we're kind of sorely lacking, is just feeling badly for other people and having compassion. So making channels for that. The other thing too, and this is a really unique and powerful website, but it's called AuthenticHappiness.org.
Okay.
And it's a free website. It's done by the University of Pennsylvania. On it, they have strength-based tests that basically look at personality. They look at authentic happiness, character strengths, and it's completely free. You have to sign up, but it doesn't cost any money. And you can actually identify your strengths. So one thing, I think a lot of us don't even know what our strengths are. And being able to to grab them and craft them and mold them and use them in combination with our other friends' strengths, to kind of be able to build more, just have a more reserve capacity for these kind of traumas when they come. One thing they've actually used some of this stuff for is in the military, to try to predict and to help people that are going to be infantrymen or people who are war fighters that are likely to get PTSD, and to try to push it off. So this is something that's been tried and true. So you have the resilience training. Another piece that you can do, and it's very, very helpful, is simply gratitude. Being grateful for the people and the things that you have, particularly when we can see how many people are losing loved ones. It's really easy to hold our kids really tight, to really cherish our friends, to have clean water, to have the basic necessities of life. And you can even look at it like Maslow's pyramid. If you have food, water, shelter, safety, trust, belonging, and then being able to really, get to the self-actualization is a really powerful humanistic model that we can all build to,
Are there simple ways that we can practice gratitude? I feel like gratitude is something that sometimes is just so far out of reach, and it's so, it's so easy to kind of take for granted all of the things that are protecting us in life that we should be grateful for. So tips for practicing gratitude.
Absolutely. And this is something that can be done in a secular way or even in a spiritual context. We look at virtues like gratitude or forgiveness in ways that there's these ephemeral kind of concepts. But one very easy, straightforward way to practice gratitude is to write a gratitude letter to someone. And then you actually have to physically go and read it to them. So this is a positive.
So not just give it to them, but read it to them.
You have to sit down with them, jump on a plane if you have to, and bring the letter.
It's so scary.
It's so scary. But what happens is, the care and crafting of the letter and doing it, it actually predicts more happiness for a full year for the person expressing the gratitude.
Really?
Yeah, and it creates more bonds too.
Well, and here's my question. Why is it so terrifying to say nice things to someone else?
Isn't it funny? I don't know if it's a rejection, like, oh, thanks, that
right.
awkwardness, but sure, it's such a scary thing to just love your neighbor.
Right. It sounds so simple, but it's
so
terrifying.
simple.
It's like, oh no, I couldn't possibly do that.
But putting it down on a piece of paper, sitting down, taking the time to read it has actually, there's been scientific studies. Scientifical.
It's a new word,
It's a new word.
coined here.
It's a bigly word, it's scientifical. So we can actually improve our happiness for a full calendar year.
Wonderful. So just by writing a letter of gratitude and reading it out loud to someone, you can. So that's my advice for everyone out there. Is to
Absolutely.
Do that.
It's something I probably should practice more.
Absolutely. I think all of us should. So what else? I mean, really, I feel like we're just getting constantly thrown at all of these negative things, certainly in every aspect. So how can we help make the world a better place, aside just from gratitude and being a little bit more empathetic?
Sure. So, I think we talked a little bit about the biological. We talked a little bit about the social factors. Psychologically, I think gratitude is absolutely a great way. If people have faith traditions, spirituality, some people don't really believe or feel comfortable with the world of psychology. So if you can even connect to someone that's a faith person or an elder in your community, older people in your community that have lived through these sorts of things before. One thing I think in our society, which is so fast-paced and it's so right now and relatively selfish, is we don't kind of lean on the wisdom of our elders. And that's something that we could benefit from, I think, is a really powerful way to kind of connect, build those bridges and those connections with people in our community. Other things you can do too, besides just, the community building, getting those social connections. One thing I find is just using your personality to your own benefit. So certain people have different ways of dealing with stuff based on who you are. And I think being really conscious and mindful about the spaces we find ourselves in and how we can best craft our world to fit us better, especially in these times of stress, making time to mourn, making time to grieve, also making time to laugh and have fun and enjoy people in your life. These are simple things, but making the time to do them and really seek it and thinking about the process as we do it is a really hot topic with mindfulness. Yogis and certain people in faith traditions know how to do it, but for the masses, just to kind of cool it, calm down, and even media fatigue. And I know this is a weird place to talk about
it's
that,
okay.
but today we got into it and I was on Facebook and I felt like I was just on it all the time and all the time and all the time. And if you live in that kind of 24/7 news cycle through Facebook and screen time and all these different places, making time to break out of that. This afternoon I'd love to pick up a fishing pole or, go hit the beach with some close friends and maybe visit my parents because now I'm back on Cape Cod, I'm not too far, and just turn it off for a little while,
Yeah, and actually that's a perfect segue to what I wanted to talk about next was the social media. And I think we're talking a lot about community, about connection, and I think that a lot of that human interaction is lost because we spend so much time on our social media channels, and it's almost causing a false sense of that support community when it really isn't there at all. And so, I'd love to hear your kind of take on, is social media, is Facebook really putting a drain, or is it taking us away from the human connection and that kind of real community sense that could bring us all closer together?
And that's what it was initially designed for. If we looked at, Facebook or Instagram or the millions of other, ways we can connect on the internet. One thing, and I noticed this with one of my coworkers the other day, he said, these people aren't liking my posts, I'm just gonna unfriend them all. And we kind of had to explain to the guy that they might not even be seeing your posts.
Right.
So sometimes what we think is people not liking us or not connecting to us on social media means that we're not being listened to or not being heard, when we have really no control over who sees our feed, and it depends on what time of the day you post and the logarithms that are unique to everyone. And the one thing that I find with Facebook particularly is we're becoming very tribal because it's designed in such a way to show you what you like. So you can live in an echo chamber all the time. So let's say I, click on Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump post or, Hillary Clinton. It's gonna basically just show me an echo chamber, all that information all the time. And it's really hard to actually get information or perspectives from other people. And so we have this kind of tribal world where no one's really actually debating anything in a healthy enough way, nor may they even see something that might upset them or be different. And then the second we don't like what somebody has or their perspective, it's like unfriend.
And I feel like that's the same though in regular interaction. We are tribal people. It's like we want to find our tribe. We want to find people who are like us, and that's typically who we spend time hanging out with and conversing with. I mean, certainly you can go and get other perspectives, but it's a little more difficult. You have to put the work in.
Yeah.
But especially if you are on that social media and it's just showing you where you're expecting to kind of maybe see something different. So maybe the advice is to try and get some different perspectives. Listen to people outside of your tribe or your group of friends.
Absolutely, and I think that's great advice, particularly because we start to reach across people and see their perspective for what it is. And for gun control, it's really hot right now. So many people are suffering. And so many people love guns and believe they're a good thing, and so many people believe they're this terrible thing. And really taking the time to stop and listen, to other perspectives. And what you'll find is some people will have really strong beliefs and good points. Some people just want to argue and fight, and that's okay too, and wading through some of that stuff. But, in those posts, just stopping and saying, hey, I might not agree with you on this point, but I really care about who you are and the perspective you're coming from, you know? And, you know, it makes me want to just put on like, what's going on? You know, like,
Little Marvin Gaye, right?
exactly. But those sorts of things to be able to try to connect people. And like in real interaction, I think it totally happens, but it's just, it seems like almost hyper-focused, where it just, you know, pushes people together and apart. And in those places too, it's challenging to have constructive dialogue, but seeking it from a warm way and asking even an I feel message, you know, I feel afraid that I don't understand your perspective because I want to understand you and see how your position is on this. And I might not have all the answers or have the right perspective, but I want to see how it's coming from you and yours. And it's amazing when you really stop and value people, how much further you can get in that conversation, you know? And it'll devolve, of course, you know. One of my friends put a little snowflake on, you know, somebody else's post today, and I kind of snickered, like, haha, I took too much satisfaction in it. But at the same time, I'm a snowflake too, you know.
Right.
So
We're all snowflakes, right?
Sure.
Delicate little individual
Yeah, delicate
snowflake.
little, you know, don't melt easily. You know?
Oh, well, just shape-shifting, right? That's all it is. Well,
Absolutely.
Dr. Tex, I thank you so much for coming in and joining me today. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
It's great to be here. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ken Texeira, of course, a professor of psychology at Quincy College at Plymouth. For Cape Media News Conversations, I'm Sarah Colvin.